She's doing what you might call Fibonacci variations or chromatic variations on the Fibonacci numbers. Jacqueline's superpower is she doesn't just hear music, she sees music. She has synesthesia, which allows her to compose music that is beautiful and vibrant, and I think you're just going to love it. Jacqueline Porter.
Do you see colors when you listen to music? I do, and yes, this talk is going to get a little weird. Music has an incredible ability to create an enormous number of different environments, and I'm going to share 2 ways that I use to make new musical worlds: color and unusual scales. So Professor Benjamin asked me to compose a Fibonacci piece for you. However, as I started coming up with ideas, I became fixated on another interesting question. How many different pieces could you make if the Fibonacci sequence determines the melody? This brings us back to color. You could say I live a colorful life. I have synesthesia, which is a perceptual phenomenon in which one sense automatically and consistently triggers another. For example, the most common type is grapheme color synesthesia, which for me projects colors onto letters, numbers, shapes, even components of Chinese, Japanese, and Tibetan characters. Which has sparked my passion in learning those languages. So here's how I see some characters in a few languages. For example, every time I see the letter A, I'll perceive red. 8 is always a dark teal, and so on. A less common type is musical chromesthesia, which for me associates colors with certain musical feels or environments. So I actually see colors in my mind's eye when listening to music, sometimes. If you think of the electromagnetic spectrum, only a small portion of light is actually visible. My musical chromesthesia is similar. Most music is colorless. So what puts music in the visible range? I think it has something to do with tonal complexity. If you were to sort music by how complicated its melody is and how complicated its chords are, there seems to be some sort of sweet spot in between dance music and Baroque music that's visible. So basically, for example, music with more predictable melodic lines or more predictable of a chord progression is like too simple to see, while music with multiple melodic lines or random improvisation is too complicated to see. By the way, I put this gradient sideways because I wanted to make the point that there doesn't seem to be any association between tonal complexity and actually what color it is. It's only whether it's visible or not. Also, the ratio of the colors on this gradient is about accurate to how likely I am to see that color. So most visible music is yellow. Next most common is music that's some shade of blue, and then red, and so on. The other colors get very rare very quickly. You also might notice, you might wonder why Radiohead has its own category here. So here's how I see some of the most vivid Radiohead songs. It turns out they're actually the only composer or band who I've seen write music in every single main color category. And I don't think it's a coincidence, because Tom York, the head of Radiohead, also has synesthesia. And anecdotally, it seems like an unusually large percentage of Radiohead fans also have musical chromesthesia. So by the way, I noticed while making the slide that it seems like they also avoid the most common shades of colors, which is that like ring right there. So it's almost like they're avoiding the conventional colors of music. And by the way, Danny Elfman is also a composer who checks off almost all of the main color categories as well. Is Danny Elfman here by any chance? Danny? Someday I need to find out if he has synesthesia. But anyway, so I decided on a new challenge for this talk, which is to demonstrate as many different colors as possible using the Fibonacci sequence as the melody, and also demonstrate the power of scales and modes and how that can greatly affect the feel of a piece. So how does the Fibonacci sequence become the melody? So if you were to assign each of these numbers to a note on the piano keyboard, you'd be off of the keyboard pretty quickly. So let's disregard the octaves. So I did the Fibonacci sequence mod 7, or you could think of it as removing sevens until I have a number between 1 and 7. So I got the sequence on the bottom here. And you'll notice that after the first 16 numbers, the sequence actually repeats. So those first 16 numbers will determine my melody in all of the compositions I'm going to share today. So all I'm going to do is change the rhythm of the notes, the tempo, the accompanying chords, and the scale. So let's talk about scales for a second. Many composers limit themselves to being in either major or minor. And I think this is a huge missed opportunity because there are literally hundreds of interesting scales that people haven't even used. So I'm proposing a new method for identifying all possible scales. You can think of it like this. In an octave on a piano, there are 12 distinct half steps that you could play. For any given scale, you're either playing or skipping each of those half steps. So you can represent this in a binary number. That binary number can be converted into a decimal. And so that decimal, I'm calling the JSID, can essentially not only provides a distinguishing ID for each scale, but also actually tells you how to play the scale. So let me give you an example of how this is useful. If you remember Game of Thrones, the faceless man, he always had an interesting way of talking. He would say things like, "A girl has no name." I bring him up because the composer, Ramin Djawadi, who's also a synesthete, by the way, made a great use of unusual scales in the soundtrack. If you paid close attention, every time the faceless man was on screen, you might have heard a mysterious ascending scale that played in the background. I wanted to know what that scale was, but it didn't match any of the maybe 50 or so named scales I could find. So of course, a scale has no name, but it has a number. So I found its JSID by playing it on the piano, noting which half steps I played, which I skipped. That gave me the binary number, and I converted that into JSID 2778. So now any of you could play that scale. You don't need music theory or anything like that. You just need a decimal to binary converter. So let's get to some musical examples. So this is my first melody that I wrote. So for each of these, I'm going to show a kind of visualization like this. Shows what pitches I'm playing and how the Fibonacci mod 7 sequence became that melody. And it also shows the rhythm. The wider the note, the longer I'm holding it. So yeah, I'm going to play through all of these. So also I should mention, so the color, I'm going to start with the color examples. They're all written for solo piano, kept as simple as possible, so you can hear exactly what makes each color different. And then at the end, I have 3 slightly more developed musical compositions that are demonstrating the power of scales and how that can greatly affect the feel of a piece. So I'm going to play through all of these without interruption, and hopefully you can hear for yourself the vastness of music. Oh, thank you so much for listening. If you didn't already get a copy, thank you. If you didn't already get a copy of my album Singularity, I'm giving out CDs, so be sure to get one from me. So yeah, any questions? Love to hear your. Oh.
Yeah, the album.
So what's the motivation for choosing 7 as your modulus?
So because oh yes, I forgot to mention that. So most popular scales have 7 distinct notes. And so that's what I was going based on. And especially because I was using like modes and things, which also have 7 distinct notes. So yeah, I did mod 7, and I just wanted to remove all of the different octaves so that I wouldn't go all the way off the piano. So yes. Yes?
Don't need a microphone? So you mentioned there are 12 tones in the scale.
Mm-hmm.
That's post-Bach. Beforehand, there was 17.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, C sharp and D flat differed.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard there
Yes.
are musicians who can actually tell the difference, though people like me can't. So I'm just curious if you looked into working with the original 17-tone scale.
I have not looked into that, and I have no idea. But yeah, that'd be really interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
One more question.
Yeah.
Quick question. Do you have perfect pitch?
No, I do not. But the thing is, some synesthesia. So I don't see colors when listening to certain tones. Like I only have this kind where it's like certain musical feels. But some synesthetes do have colors when they listen to they'll hear a D and they'll see a certain color. So that does give them perfect pitch. But that is a different kind than what I have.
Well, let's thank Jack one more time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.